Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this week's Inspiring Leadership podcast. And I'm delighted to have a fascinating guest who fits our criteria of being an inspiring leader. And he also has the three hums that we often talk about: humility, humanity, and a nice bit of dry humor. Probably comes from 24 years in the Royal Marines. And I think one of the Royal Marines mottos is something about keeping your humor in bad conditions. An amazing career, starting 19 years old as a Marine, then going back to do the Marine selection again as an officer or a potential officer and passing into that. Fascinating time. He's got a mention dispatches, a DSO, an MC, an OBE. And after his time in the Marines and specialist bits of the Army, he then decided, instead of staying on to become a brigadier, which he was lined up to be, that instead he wanted to fight his way into a tougher career of becoming the MP for Birmingham, Selly, which is on the map behind his head for those of you watching YouTube, an area he knows well. He's walked all those streets. And also, we're very fortunate to have him as the Veterans, Family and People's Minister at a particularly crucial time of what's going on in the world and in our country. Al, welcome to the Inspiring Leadership podcast.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
Well, let's begin chronologically. I'm always very interested in leaders like yourself. What shaped you as you were growing up? Was the parents, were the teachers, was there somebody who you had at school who gave you this drive and quiet resolve to do some really tough things? Where does it come from, Al?
I think the first thing I think is always useful to recognize is a lot of people talk about self-made man. Mm-hmm. I don't think there's such a thing. You're always helped by people and individuals who can spot certain parts of your characters or your certain traits, and they amplify them and help you along the journey. Much the same as a current pushing a stick down the stream. So I was brought up in Aberdeen, a relatively humble upbringing. I actually went back at Christmas to my mum's house. She's still in the same house. It's a 3-bedroom, semi-detached, and I do not understand how she fit 5 children in that house at the same time. Me and my 2 brothers, double bunk beds in one room for most of our upbringing. My mum is probably the one that showed me how determination and drive and real leadership to pull that family together and push us on to deliver and realize our ambitions, really. So, if I was to name one person, I'd say, it's probably my mother when I was growing up.
Yeah, and you mentioned mother, no mention of father. What was the story with father?
Well, he left early on. Still in contact with him, good relationship, but wasn't necessarily there for a large part of my upbringing. And obviously 2 brothers and 2 sisters, so there's a good little clan up there.
Yeah.
It was great fun. I had a great upbringing. It was fantastic. But it was, I lived on the edge of a council estate. I went to school now, sort of 4 kilometres away, really enjoyed it.
And I think that's very important that, that experience that you had never makes you take anything for granted. And I think it also was very special later on, you starting as a Marine, as a private soldier, to know what it's like to walk in their shoes before you then had the privilege of leading them. And from what I know from people like Scotty Mills, who's going to be on this again, and he took you through training and sends his best wishes, they respected you for the fact that there was a humility that comes from knowing what it's like to be a soldier. And I think this is very important as you go around, and we'll talk about it later on in your job as a minister, to the people you meet, the veterans you meet, that you can relate to them. Because some people, certainly in politics or the CEOs that I have, sometimes find it hard to relate to people. But where did this ability to relate to people from all walks of life come from? Because you've clearly got it, and I found it very easy to talk to you.
Yeah, I think you've got to follow before you can lead, I think, is my sort of one of my sayings. And I think what I did when I joined at a young rank, interesting trying to get into the military. It took me 1.5 years to get in the military because of various injuries. I managed to set myself on fire as a kid and had third degree burns, 11% of my body, and I then broke my neck and my leg in a different accident. So it was a bit of a nightmare, but it took me a while to get in. But once I got in, I did 4 years as another ranked Marine. I just tried to excel. I sort of picked the good leaders and the good traits that I saw, tried to ape them, and then decided at a certain point that actually I wanted to go on and deliver more. I thought I could lead well, so I put myself and went through the commando course again. So another year of training. So I did the commando course twice, all the tests twice, which is a good challenge.
Yeah, you're reminding me of David Goggins, who broke his leg while doing Navy SEAL training and went back again to do it Hell Week again. And I know in my very limited way, with a schoolboy introduction to 2-9 Commando, and going over the Citadel walls forward, and going down wet tunnels, being shoved down, and the instructor's going, it's going to be very hot when you get in there, so don't get scalded. And you get in there and you're down the tunnel and you go, it's freezing. But your brain was telling you it's going to be hot, because they rag you and they tease you. And I suppose that's something that will serve you well throughout your life. The fact that mum brought the 5 of you up and there were no airs and graces and there was no room for complacency, was there, I presume?
Yeah, I mean, it's the really early stages of teamwork, really, when you think about it.
Yeah.
And more importantly, I always say, going through some of those injuries early on in life, it gives you a rite of arc. If you've almost died by burning and breaks, you realize that actually nothing's really that bad to the left of it. And so when you go through commando training and you go into the sheep dip underwater, or you're in a 30-mile speed march, or it's all a little bit hard and it's raining and it's wet, it's never that bad. And there's a fantastic book actually called We Die Alone,
Okay.
which I'd recommend to any reader or listener to the podcast, which is a book about a Norwegian special operation executive who deploys into Norway in the Second World War. And the harrowing story he goes through is a fantastic reminder that there's always people out there who've got it worse off than you do.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be something that stays with you, because I think when we've been talking about leadership and followership, and you say you've got to follow before you lead, you've got to understand what it means to be a good follower. It is this this point about knowledge, skills, and attitude is what people in business, and a lot of people listening in 126 countries around the world, will be thinking about. How does Al's experience in the military and his time in politics, how does it relate to us? And I think you're bringing out this point about attitude. You hire for attitude and you fire for attitude. Knowledge and skills can be trained, but if you've got, whether it be a Marine or you've got someone who wants to enter politics as a special advisor, if their attitude is bad, you're not really going to be able to do very much with them. What's your thoughts?
You're on the money, Jonathan. I always say character over resume every time.
Yeah.
So get the right individuals in, surround yourself with the very best people, set the boundaries, delegate, empower, and trust. That's what I live by. And if you get that right, you watch the magic fly. I mean, and delegation empowerment is critical. If they've got the right character, the right attitude, you delegate and empower, and they're off. I actually give I've got young children, and we're not necessarily religious, so boundaries wise and sort of rules of as you move through life don't necessarily exist. So I always tell 3 things. I always say healthy body, sharp mind, and right attitude.
Oh, that's good.
And when they cross anyone, so help your mum do the dishwasher, or do this, and they moan and they gripe at me, I would say, hey, is that the right attitude? Or when they're snaffling chocolate, healthy body, or so I think it's a really good set of boundaries, and I actually make them repeat them to me when they're not following the principles.
Healthy body, sharp mind, and right attitude.
So sharp mind, homework, for example. Stop moaning about your homework, boys. Come on, you've got to get after it. If you're going to excel in life, you've got to train the brain. So
yeah. And it's interesting. I was listening to a motivational speaker, Robbins, forgotten her first name. It'll come to me in a minute. Mel Robbins. And she has a book which is called the Let Them theory. Let them let you. So in other words, when you're getting worried about what somebody else thinks about you, let them do that. Don't get wrapped up around it. Don't get so worried about what others think. And then let you decide how you're going to set your own attitude, your mindset. But I think character over resume every time. And the problem these days is people use AI to polish up their resume as if it's something completely different from the real person you meet. And you go, excuse me, even the picture's different compared to who I'm now meeting. Who are you? Yeah. And this is where character's everything.
I think it's really interesting, Jonathan. If you were to ask any senior leader after years of going through this process, can they get it right in the first 5 to 10 minutes of meeting someone? And it's a really interesting test. And you'll find that the best leaders have a very good judgment or assessment of an individual within an early stage. Sometimes they'll be wrong, but it's interesting to see how far you get it wrong. And I don't think there's many serious cases where you got it wrong in the past. Actually become a really good judge of character. But some of the best leaders are the best judges of characters.
That is very true. And actually, from the neuroscience, we know we have 89 billion neurons here. So this is the sort of logical part. Around our heart, 40,000 neurons. And around in our gut and the vagus nerve that runs from the gut to the brain, we have 100 million. And so what they're saying is the gut and the heart are mini brains. And they're sending more signals to the brain than the brain sends to them. So actually, and you would be taught this in your time leading people in the military, that you have a gut feeling about something. It's a term they use. But actually, the gut is working out a whole load of signals. And somatically, you're picking up what's going on. So when you were with people in your tours in Afghanistan and they were scared or anxious, if you're a good leader, you'd pick up. You'd know what's going on. And if you go a bit woo-woo, we're actually, our boundary doesn't just end with the skin. It goes beyond the skin of what you're actually picking up from other people. You can sense people in a room in the dark. I'm sure you had to do this many a time when you're in a building or whatever. And people sort of forget that good leaders can really, the Germans call it Fingerspitzgefühl, this fingertip feel, don't they?
Rommel.
What do you think? What's your thoughts on that?
Rommel came out with that quote, didn't he, when he used to go down and visit the front line to get the feel of what the battle was like on the command. I'm a massive fan of it. So there's a really good book called Blink. I don't know if you ever read it.
Yes.
Matthew Gladwell. Which talks about cognitive bunching. So when you're in a car, you subconsciously bunch together 1,000 different tasks to make the car go forward and get you on your journey. Without looking in the mirror, changing the gears, listening to the engine, shuffling yourself in the seat, the braking speed, etc. Well, it's also no different for when you're in the military. If you've done it for so long, if you've been involved in so many high-intensity operations or raids or operations, you instinctively get a feel for what is going to happen and how it's going to go. Because you are collectively picking up on 1,000 different experiences, and very quickly you're analysing it, processing it, and then making a judgment. And that is often, I've always described it of, reading, know the enemy, read the ground, and try and second guess him, and you'll tend to get ahead of him.
Yeah.
And that comes with a bit of experience, but also sort of the aggression, the determination, and the drive to compete.
And you've done so many different selection courses, whether it be mountain and Arctic or whatever it might be. Did you find your training on the very first Royal Marine course that you did gave you a foundation that stood the test of time, and you just built on it over time? I sort of wondered how you use that to give you the resilience against adversity, to keep yourself going, take it one step at a time. Whatever other people I've spoken to, they just stage at a time, just do this bit, I'll get through this day. And then what was the sort of mental attitude you've allowed you to get through difficult times?
I mean, never give up. It's the first one. And if you make a mistake or you get things wrong, learn from it. And a mistake is only an error if you do it twice. And so as I've gone through my career, I did commando training initially. It's 32 weeks. That gave me the shock to the system. I thought, before I went into the Marines, I was a little bit of a rogue at the best of times. That really shook me down. It put me down. It, rewrote some of my character. It sort of stripped me back and then built me back up into the person that I've become. And then 4 years later, after multiple operational tours in the Middle East, I then went back and did the same course again, but as an officer. So I didn't need to focus on the very basics of rifle lesson 1, although I did them all again, to navigation. I could actually really focus on my leadership credentials. And that was helping the people in the batch get through training. And that was a really, really useful bedding in tool to become or to develop my leadership credentials as I moved on.
Yeah. And you talk about focusing on those leadership skills. I often ask my guests for 2 other leaders that they have, they're still in touch with, that they find inspiring, that would be almost like your guests, as it were, on the podcast. Who would you want to do a shout out for? We obviously had David Petraeus recommended Bill McRaven, who both of those people. Who would you want to do a shout out for, either military or in business, as inspiring leaders that you think should be on the podcast?
Yeah, I think there's 2. There's actually 3. And interestingly, they're all US leaders. So I really respected General Scotty Miller. who I worked for, sort of slightly detached, but worked for him in Afghanistan several times. And I was really inspired with General Fenton, who's a current SOCOM commander. Both of those individuals, I thought, had a unique ability to listen to the grassroots level and then wield their machine to act upon those the issues that were raised and change it. And now, in some cases, the simplicity of that is the trick to leadership. So I'm a really big fan of both of them.
Yeah, and you mentioned a third possible.
Well, General Nicholson was in Afghanistan when we were there as well, and I was always amazed at his ability and his ability to articulate the problem, which was on a country scale, and then really focus down on where we could deliver effective support. And again, buying in all these sub-elements that would come to him, and I was one of them, and then really harness them and focus them in the right direction to deliver outputs was really impressive. And to do it in a humble way, which wanted you to not necessarily please him, but deliver for him because you felt a duty to it, not just because of the rank structure, but because you bought into his leadership style was so important.
Yeah, it is a very interesting one. And few leaders can get from the tactical to the operational to the strategic and then back down again, whether it be in the military or in business. And it sounds like you've had some great role models that you've learned from. It's an interesting one. I don't know whether this is what you use, but some people find when they're in a difficult moment, they have mentally a collection of sort of mentors that they visualize around them if they were there with them at this tough time. Was there anybody that you've found over the years that you sometimes visualize them with you as you were going through a really difficult time on an operation or in training or anything? Or was it just you talking to yourself, really?
Going on. Madness. Yeah. I think I go back to that book. I read that book, and We Die Alone, really early on in my career. And when things are difficult and there's a multitude of different pressures, and personal and professional are starting to weigh you down, and everything's starting to look a bit bleak. Think to some of the other individuals that have gone through something that is on a different level and a different scale. And it suddenly snaps you out. It puts things into context. And I think that's not just important on personal issues, but also from a global issue, even as we speak. Put it into context. The war in Ukraine is 2,000 casualties a day.
Yeah.
That's 500 by breakfast, 500 by lunch, 500 by dinner, and 500 by the time you sleep. That's 2,000 casualties a day. We lost, we didn't even lose that many from a death perspective in Iraq and Afghanistan put together in 20 years. So when you take things in context, then you can then position yourself to and change your mood to move forward. Yeah,
no, that's really sobering to think of that, and I think often when people go, I'm having a really bad day. You're having a bad day? Do you have any idea what a bad day is like? Exactly. This is luxury.
Yeah. But also there's a different context there, John. Some people have a different perspective on what is a bad day. So it's not one size fits all, and it's really careful not to judge other people by my experiences.
No.
People have different. One day in Afghanistan, you could be flying into a target, all the miniguns would be firing. You'd be fast roping at the back. You go straight to the objective. You'd be involved in a massive firefight. There'd be casualties. The dog would be killed. There'd be, all hell would break loose, and you'd come back, and everyone was smiling and happy, and the team was really well put together. And then on other days, you go on a really easy job, and something horrendous would happen. I suppose my point is it's a different context, and different experiences shape different attitudes.
Yeah, and I think you touched on a good point about be careful not to judge other people and look at their life from your perspective, because you do not know what they've gone through. And I think about how smart somebody was who spotted you in your 4 years as a Marine and realized you had the potential to be an officer. I think of Rod Thomas, who's a great friend of mine, still is now. We're in our 60s, 63 though. Well, I think he's about 68 now, Rod. Just had his birthday. But he began as a private soldier in the signals. He was a very smart guy. He became a corporal. And then he came to Sandhurst, and he was my next door roommate. And we've remained friends ever since, some 43 years later. But I learned so much from him, and he always puts down to Jim Kirby and who recognized in him as a captain, he recognized in him as a corporal that he'd make a great officer, and he came out like you as a colonel, full colonel in the army, and was really such a, I don't know, backbone for our platoon. We all come back together again. Do you still have reunions with all your?
So, I mean, they go back on, the individual that spotted me, I think it was called Major Bray. And I remember the day he called me into his office. He said, Carns, have you ever thought about being an officer? And I said, yeah, I have actually. And he said, well, great. We'll waiver your potential officer's course. We'll put you on an AIB and we'll get after it. And that was it. And so, we talk about self-made men. There's no such thing, without Major Bray. He wouldn't have helped me on that journey.
Yeah, that was Arnold Schwarzenegger said that as well, wasn't he? When someone said, "Oh, you're a self-made man," he goes, "No, I stand on the shoulders of giants. I've other people have taught me so much. It never would have happened if it wasn't for Major Bray or the equivalent."
That's exactly it.
And Mum sounds like she's one hell of a lady. I mean, to brought up 5 of you, I different way. My dad was you perhaps can't see in my room, but there's my father's naval cap. He was 33 when he was killed flying, and he died saving the lives of 2 other people. But that's another story. But the point is, Mum brought us up 3 boys on her own, and I think a lot of people try and give the credit to the male in any kind of situation, but you're very good, I know, of calling out for the women as well as for the men and the key part they play. Do you want to just do a shout out for your mum and the qualities that she brought in and what you respect about her?
Well, I respect her because she's put up with a ridiculous amount of hardship. She's had obviously my dad and stepdad sort of in and out. She's had a lot of difficulty thrown at, but she's managed to move forward with a smile and confidence that has drifted down and been sort of brought up or bedded into all of her children, who then aped that and moved forward. And she's always been encouraging of anything we've wanted to do. And it's been, I think it's so many valuable subconscious and conscious lessons as we move forward. And I think that's just demonstrated a remarkable level of strength of character to be able to go through all of that with 5 kids, which is in that house, which I do not understand how she could do it. And it's the same, I'll say, principle for my, my ex-wife, who is looking after my boys by herself. We talk about hardships and we talk about difficulties, in the military, and a lot of people in the military listen to this. You focus so hard on your work. Sometimes you sacrifice your bits of your personal life, and you actually become incredibly unempathetic in the military. And one thing I've learned, looking at the constituency behind me, that when you go back into the civilian world, you realize you're actually living in the military in a very small section of society. And when you open that up, and as an MP, you see everything, your empathy levels expand, they quadruple overnight. And you realize actually that people have different experiences. People do have and aren't dealt the same cards in life. And as a result, shouldn't be held necessarily accountable for some of the actions.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you touch on that. And one of my guests, its podcast is coming out soon, is Liz McConaughey. And Liz wrote a book called Chinook Crew Chick. She was a staff sergeant at the door of Chinooks as people were coming in and out. Probably may have lifted you out of some positions and dropped you off in Afghanistan. I think she did 10 tours in Afghanistan and 3 in Iraq. But she and her husband, who spent his time in some very dodgy operations, they both really closed down their emotions. And so when eventually she came out with a neck injury from hanging out the door, and it was just, she had to be discharged from it, her whole world sort of melted in. And then, of course, their marriage melted and she went down into deep PTSD. And you and I have both been divorced. I'm now lucky I'm remarried. I've been married for 10 years to my wife, Lee, and I don't intend to change that. I'm going to make the most of this. I'm learning from it. But so many in the forces, and in your role as veterans minister and families as well, and people, the pressure of you were involved in a 20-year war. The pressure of being in and out, and you're there at home, but you're not there. And then when you are back, you want to be in charge, but you don't know. It really puts untold pressure on marriages, and an awful lot go by the wayside. I mean, do you have a view, or what's the way ahead?
Jonathan, I think you're again, you've hit on such a key theme there. The reality is in the military, to survive mentally, you need to close your emotions down. Especially when you're an operational tour. It's not necessarily when you're day to day, but when you're an operational tour, you've got to close it down. You've got to really focus on the job in hand. And I think especially when you're in serious combat on a regular basis, it's the only way you will stay focused on the mission. I always say mission, man, self, and self at the end. It's the mission first, the men second, and then of course you've got to look after yourself to run the machine. What I would say is lots of individuals in the military, and I would say this from my own experience, is you commit 110% of your job because you're bought into the purpose. You're bought into your comrades, you're bought into the fight, you're bought into the operational output because you believe it and you see it every day. Well, your loved ones back at home don't see that level of intensity. They don't necessarily live in that world. They live in a separate world that sees their partner, their loved ones away all the time. And you've got to reconcile those two, and you've got to make an effort to. And if you don't, it will end up in cracks forming. And secondly, when you do come out of the military and you take away that purpose, you take away that drive, you take away those comrades, you take away the wraparound service you get from the military, it is very difficult to adapt because we train people to join the military. We don't train them to be civilians. And so sometimes the cracks can form almost immediately. And it usually, not usually, in some cases results in breakdowns of relationships and some significant mental or psychological issues.
Yeah, and there's a good friend of mine who gave a lot to the military in some very interesting roles that he did. Four times he went back into very interesting roles. And he had to close down his emotions. But now we're 20 years later, and his PTSD is coming back to really haunt him big time. He's remarried. He's got 2 lovely young girls. But it's just so sad to see that he's going through such a tough time. And he was a very fine officer. And sometimes people can't, because they can't see the, when you got burnt, they could tell you were burnt. When you broken something, they could tell. But of course, as you know only too well with all the people you meet, you cannot see the mental injury or the fact it's about to come. And in the case of one of the ladies who I was interviewing who'd served in the forces, she tried to commit suicide. She took about 96 painkillers or I think antidepressants. And luckily somebody found her because she was about to die. But people didn't spot it because she was covering up. So I'm fine. And so what have you learned over the years about, I don't know, the cues that you need to pick up early? Before I ask you that, there was a very powerful one, I think done by the armed forces, about 2 mates who were going to a football game. And you kept seeing that they're going to the game each time. One was looking a bit glum. The other one was cheerful and he was doing this. And then you saw a scarf on one of the chairs and the guy wasn't there. But it wasn't the sad one. It was a cheerful one who'd taken his life. Sorry,
No, I think Jonathan, I mean, the fact is evoking emotion from yourself there's it talks and highlights the scale of the issue.
Yeah.
That we in the military get trained to bandage up bullet wounds and explosions and lost limbs. We don't get trained to necessarily as effectively to spot or identify, treat, and then manage mental health.
No.
And I've listened to your Foxy podcast. He's an advocate of it. I'm a massive advocate of it. I don't necessarily suffer for it at the moment.
Yeah.
But at some point it will come back to haunt me, I'm sure, and someone else and others. And it's really important that we, at every opportunity, we talk.
Yeah.
And communicate. Because in the military, you're taught to bottle it. There's a culture to bottle it up and focus on the job, and you've got to do that in some cases.
Yeah.
But in other cases, we've got to create a culture where people are happy to talk about it and discuss their issues, so they can collectively and individually heal. I think that's so important. And if there's anything I can do to support that, I'm absolutely going to champion it. I think it's one of the biggest issues.
Yeah, and I think I was talking to another veteran who said that the number who have died through suicide since the Falklands, and I served the 2nd Battalion Scots Guards, who'd just come back from the Falklands, and I could see that the platoon I commanded, there was 1 or 2 guys who were very badly mentally damaged by it. They were not the same. People were saying they're not the same as they were. And so this problem of people taking their lives or just being in a really bad place, it's very hard for us to deal with that. But the interesting thing, Al, is this is not just for the military community. I come across CEOs, partners in law firms who've been dealing, they've buried the issue. They've locked it in a room in their head and they're cracking on. And then suddenly it all comes crashing down years later, maybe. And one particular one who was a partner of a big actuarial firm, all he could do was sit on the sofa, watch TV with his kids running around. He couldn't do anything, and walk the dog. That was about the limit of it. He'd been running an organization of 1,000 people, and then suddenly it all just collapsed in on him. And sometimes, as you say, you certainly must talk about it, but don't think you should bury it, lock it away in a room, and it'll be fine, because it'll come one day, and it'll bite your bum, and you won't be ready for it.
I think you've got to talk about these things, and you've also got to recognise the triggers when it's going, or when not to say relapsing, but when you have an issue brewing. I was interested. I don't really talk about this to many people, but I was watching Fury. Have you seen Fury, the film?
No. Yes, I know. Yes, with the tank.
When all the tanks line out and they fire all their heavy machine guns into the wood line. I don't know if you remember that scene.
Yeah.
I remember when I was sat in the cinema watching it, I was actually crouched right down.
Really?
And I had to lift myself back up.
Wow.
It was interesting. Now, that wasn't because I was super relaxed. It was some sort of psychological reaction to it. And I don't know what it was, but
yeah.
And the other moment I had, it was actually my daughter's 21st birthday the other day. And I got a little bit upset because I've only seen her, I reckon, for 2 years out of 21.
Wow.
And, it's quite sad. And
yes.
So, I would argue for the CEOs out there, or the leaders of industry that are listening, identify the triggers, talk to people about it, and make sure you share the experiences, because a problem shared is a problem halved. It may not be the solution towards it, but it will help.
Well, there's one plug I'll do for a friend of mine, Neil Basu, head of counterterrorism at the Met. His book is called Turmoil, 30 Years of Politics, Police and Prejudice. Very powerful book. And when he was a guest, it was a really powerful conversation. I recommend people listen to Neil Basu. His real name is Anil Kanti Basu, but the Welsh couldn't cope with saying that, so they called him Neil, because mother and father were mixed Indian and Welsh. But he looks back on his full-on commitment to policing and counterterrorism. You know how, you've worked alongside people in that world, and how committed they have to be. He gave his all to policing. And he said, looking back, I would give anything for 5 more minutes with the son who I'm estranged from, or more time with my children. And of course, you think you're doing the right thing. You're giving your all to your job and your country. And it's like being pregnant. You can't be a little bit pregnant. You've got to be fully committed. Otherwise, you could die. And so you're all in, but that means there's less of you when you get back home, and they don't recognize who you are. And making the change from that world to the world at home, it's the same for people. For example, I find in business, I go, the person who you are at home and the person you are in your job as CEO, are you the same? Oh, no, I'm 2 different people. And I said, well, that's why it's coming up to catch you, because you can't live 2 different people. You have to be the authentic same wherever you go. And of course, the military asks you to be 2 different people. I've been spending, in my 20 years since I came out, time removing the masks. I went to boarding school. I went to the army. Don't do this. Don't feel your emotions. Go and did the airborne training, all this kind of stuff with the instructors yelling at me and this kind of stuff. Don't feel the pain. Keep going. And it's only later in life, after I've been to Peru and tried ayahuasca, and I've done men's retreats, and I've done the Hoffman process, which is very good. And I've done an 11-day Vipassana Buddhist meditation silent retreat, nice. All these things.
I like it.
But it's the masks have come off. And so I am actually, what you see is what you get now. But it wasn't how I was years ago. I was trying to be something else.
I mean, Jonathan, very few people lie on their deathbed and say they wish they'd worked harder.
No.
They all say, I wish I spent my time with my family and my loved ones. To a man and woman, that's what they all say.
Yeah.
And so you've got to get that balance. You've got to get that balance correct.
Yeah.
And I would just say, when the pressure piles on, Especially in politics or in the military, I've been absolutely driven on focusing on issues that are bigger than myself, because I think I can make a disproportionate impact that'll make other people's lives better, whether that's in the military at the lowest rank all the way up to the people in Selly. That's what I'm driven to do. But you've also got to make sure you spend a bit of time focusing on the individuals that rely on you.
Yes.
Which are, your children, your loved ones, your family, etc. And I think that's equally as important.
Very much so. And I think my own calling, which is to positively influence and inspire the CEOs and teams that I work with. But the caveat is, in order to touch the lives of people I may never meet, to positively touch the lives of people I may never, and in your case particularly, there are people listening around the world who will be positively impacted by what you say on this. And I've listened to your recordings on various other places in the work you've been doing as the Veterans and People's Minister. And so, never forget the impact. And you won't know. Years later, someone will meet you and say, do you know what? When you said that bit about follow before you lead, I've never forgotten that.
Yeah. Interesting, Jonathan. When I was a young Marine, I was doing heavy machine gun drills on a machine gun, and a young officer walked past me. Who are you? And I stood up, Marine Carns P057091 Charlie. And he said, hey, really good drills on that machine gun. You've really, you've taken the professionalism to a different level. You keep going. And then walked off. Now, he won't remember me from Adam, but I remember him. And I often describe leadership like walking along a snow line or ridge line, and these little snowballs roll off your footprints and they roll down the hill. Some grow into massive, avalanches. Others peter out to be nothing. My point being is that every action you have as a leader will result in a reaction. And so take time to know people, take time to buy into what they're doing. And when you see someone doing something really well, give them the credit for it. And then nurture them to get better and better. And that's how you design and deliver an organization that's more than the sum of its parts.
I love that. And which takes me on to the things that you learn both with your mother's values and then the Marines' values and the basic core training. What are you finding keeps coming up for you as it's a repeat of a value or a characteristic that you've been trained, or an attribute that you're using now in politics? What would you say are some of the things that have come back from upbringing and from Marine training that you use today, even now?
Yeah, so I'm a firm believer that you should lead by example. If you're asking someone to do something, you should always be willing to do it yourself.
Yeah,
and I think that that demonstrates a level of selflessness, but leadership that people want to follow. I'm a firm believer of the unrelenting pursuit of excellence, but not to the point of where excellence reduces your ability to generate momentum. I'm a big fan of cheerfulness under adversity. You mentioned it earlier on, which is a good Royal Marine characteristic, i.e. when things are going bad or things are getting very serious, or there's a pause in the room, come out with a joke. And let everyone, it's never usually as bad as it first seems or as worse as it first seems. So try and bring a bit of spark and life to it. I do think, we've got to, and I said this earlier, surround yourself with the best team. Identify that team, surround yourself with the best, and empower them, delegate to them, and trust them. And if you set clear boundaries, you just watch them go. And, you just need to touch the rudder every 10 degrees every now and again, rather than have to, manage the whole ship yourself. And I think that's the essence of teamwork. And if you can harness that, then the magic will absolutely fly. Other cheesy ones are, stay low, move fast, and run to the sound of gunfire. Run to the sound of the problems.
Yeah,
because that's the kind of people you want in your team. I've said this to multiple veterans. I've said, courage is a decision, not a reaction.
Oh yeah.
You need to make an active decision to be courageous. And that could be anything from speaking up to your boss, highlighting abuse in the workplace, all the way through to storming a machine gun position. Fear is a reaction, and be careful how you react to fear.
Yeah. So courage is a decision, fear is a reaction. Is that right? Yeah. No, that is really very poignant. And perhaps with that idea of courage, we learn a lot from our successes, but we, as you probably remember, we learn a lot more from our failures. And I once said to someone, I've learned so much from my failures. I think I'm going to go make a few more. But in all seriousness, we have highlights and we have some dark moments. And I'm sure you've had many dark moments. But if there was one dark moment in your life or your career, that you're prepared to share. I'm sure you've had many. What was the story, and what have you learned, and how did you adapt since then in a way that's improved the quality of your life and your leadership?
Yeah, I mean, the first one, Jonathan, is don't play with fire.
Yes. Well, what happened? What did you do to yourself?
I managed to. It's hilarious when I act out after a beer or two. But I managed to put petrol on a barbecue and it blew up. And,
Oh no!
I caught fire and rolled around to try and put the fire out and dislocated my knee and had 3rd-degree burns on 11% of my body. It was all a bit miserable. But the healing process was truly a test of determination and morale. I mean, that was a long 3 months, 4 months, 5 months healing process, skin grafts,
Wow.
getting the skin scrubbed off with a iron brush every morning.
What?
Yeah, I know. We had to go dead skin off, pus going down. It was just it was really, really bad. But that is a fantastic. I wouldn't recommend it, but it's a fantastic grounder for hardship. And then
Does it still affect you now?
No, I'm fine. I've just got a bit of a Freddy Krueger leg, but the sort of skin grafts in my right leg. Interesting.
Yeah.
Then we're school tight. So then we're tight to school for a year.
Oh God, yeah.
That's a good one for character building. And but I would say the one dark moment I had, probably losing people in combat.
Yes.
As a leader, you never necessarily show it to the team, but as a leader, I've always said to people when you lose people in combat, never say what if, because it's happened. By all means, learn the lessons, but never say what if. What if I had done this? What if I had done that? The enemy has a vote in combat.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's always going to be unavoidable when there is conflict.
Yeah.
And so that self criticism, the self analysis, it's really, really important when on operations in the military, or indeed even in the civilian world, when things go wrong. Learn the lessons. Any confident organization will critique itself and allow an external challenge panel to do so as well. Learn the lessons and move forward. And yes, by always remember, but never necessarily dwell or take the momentum out of what you're doing because of either things that go wrong or, again, the enemy. Involved.
Yeah. No, very, very sage lessons from a tough time, and reliving it and going over it again and again, as you say, just pulls you apart.
I remember Jonathan walking off target once, and it'd been the most horrendous firefight. We'd had one killed, 20% casualties we took on that job, but we basically we had a fantastic success rate on target. And as we walked off, Jonathan, in the middle of the night, walked onto the back of the CH-47, which is a twin rotor blade helicopters, for those that don't know. In the middle of our line was a goat that had followed us all the way back. Came onto a helicopter with us, and it's those little things. We'd had a horrendous day, very successful, but it came at cost. And as we walked off, a goat came with us, and we all had a laugh on the back of the helo with this goat sat next to us. All the energy was tooled up, guns and grenades and everything else, and there was this goat sat with us that we then handed off when we landed at the next HLS.
Oh, brilliant!
We obviously wanted to join our club, not the club that he was with.
That's right. He thought it was not good staying with the enemy.
But it's a cheerfulness under adversity.
Yeah. You certainly, you've got to have humour in difficult circumstances. And I think all too often people get very intense in business and they need to occasionally lighten up. I've always been told by my old commanding officer was Richard Dannett. I don't know if you ever worked with Richard, but a very special person and quite a mentor to me. And he says, John, don't be too intense. You're a bit too serious. I go, yeah. That's work in progress.
Walk into a meeting and turn around and say, hey, I'm going to talk you through the biggest mistake I've ever made. And you watch, so you create a safe environment in a meeting. Yeah. If you turn around, you go, right, I'm going to talk you through, I've got quite a lot of awards for bravery and gallantry, whatever else. And that in itself and rank can create a division. And so walk into a room and go, right, listen to this story. This is when I messed up. And then everybody will go, oh, he's human.
Yeah.
He's a human person. And they'll be far more inclined to talk and discuss and challenge when you create.
That's a really good way. It's the power difference, and whether they're CEOs, the best ones I know, rather than sort of walking around and looking down on people at desks, they just pull up a chair, say, "Hi, this is who I am." Say, "What? I got lost on the way here. How about you?" And it's like bringing you.
It levels the boards. And the other bit, Jonathan, I think is great, is when you're in a meeting. I did this the other day. Right, what did you take away from that meeting?
Yeah,
that we'll still all sat around. What direction do you think I actually gave you?
Yeah.
And you watch some of the comments that come back, highly amusing. And so, gives you ability to sort of rewrite that and balance it out.
No, it's very good. And actually that takes us really to the present day with, I must say, in preparing for this meeting, I've interacted a lot with your different members of your team. And it's been a very good experience. It's really an interesting reflection on the different CEOs and leaders and politicians that I've had the pleasure of having on here. You get a sense of the leader from the people that work around them, who they choose to have. And I did feel that they were allowed to think for themselves and make decisions. And if you were here, what would they want? So I just want to give a shout out for your team that it is good experience interacting with them. And of course, they're the front face of you.
Yeah, well,
So
I appreciate that, and there's a great team.
yeah,
Again,
yeah,
I just delegate and empower and give them and let them. They've all got their own characters and their own personalities. Let them expand and be free.
yeah,
And then every now and again, just touch the rudder and go, hey, you might want to change a bit of that or change a bit of this, or actually, I wanted that. If you're not getting what you want, it's because you're not asking the right questions.
correct.
In the right direction.
And have you got a book in you? I'm sure you have. Have you got one coming? A book?
No, I don't actually. Well, there's a big chunk of my career where I worked in specialist bits, and so
You can't talk about it.
that creates a bit of an issue.
Yeah. But it might be
There's
just
some
that.
funny stories in there, that's for sure.
Yeah, it might just be that you could bring out some themes, though, because there's two really good books. If you haven't come across them, I commend them to people listening. One is called Trust and Inspire by Stephen M.R. Covey, the son of the older Covey who did the 7 Principles of Highly Effective People, I think it's called. And the other one was a naval captain, David Marquet, called Turn the Ship Around and Leadership as Language. And they're both what you talk about, which is this trust and inspire. And unfortunately, still today, we find people around the world in different countries, and certainly some CEOs still want to micromanage and not trust and disempower people. And so I feel on one hand, we have, certainly in the military that I meet, both the UK and other nations like America, we've got some very inspiring people. But in some parts of the world with politics, whatever, we have expiring leaders, misleaders. I don't know if you have a view that you can say generically.
I have very good, my opinion on this is that micromanagement kills growth, innovation, and momentum.
Yeah.
And so I'm a firm believer that when you micromanage someone, you do not allow them to realize their potential.
Yeah.
And I think it's one way to slow down the advancement of any company or organization.
I would agree.
And I think it's a really, really bad, bad trait.
They think, I've seen it one particular, they think it gives them more control over what's going on. They know where the numbers are and things like that. But it actually just makes people paralyzed with fear.
The reality is, Jonathan, I used to say this when I was a troop commander, a squadron commander, a C commanding officer, a task force commander. When I spoke to people, I'd be like, hey, I am out of date. I am out of date of what you're talking about. So this is the rough effect I want you to achieve. Now you tell me how you're going to achieve it and tell me how I can help you do it. Because the reality is, as the higher you get, the less in date you are with the actual really detailed ability to deliver the job of your subordinates. When a young operator comes up to me and says, hey, I want to do A, B, C, D, crack on. I'm out of date. I don't actually know how to do it. Because let's go forward 10 months. The future, if you were to ask me how to conduct an operation, perhaps in a far-flung place to go and capture or neutralize a target, I would turn around, we're going to get 60 people, we're going to jump on a helicopter and we're going to do AB, we're going to kick the doors down, we're going to do the old movie of where we raid the target. Your average Joe now will turn around and go, well, actually, I'll just put my first-person view goggles on, I'll launch my drone, it'll fly 40 kilometers, it'll blow a hole in the wall, another drone will go in and it will go and do the job for me. So, who's in date? So step back, give those boundaries, delegate, empower, trust.
But you bring up a really fascinating point. Perhaps we can move more to today and that transition for you between the military and into your job, but still connected with the military. I think we're going to look back on certainly the Ukraine war with a major shift to the UAVs and a different way of doing things. What's your prediction of how you think warfare is going to start to evolve? You've probably been watching it.
Yeah. How long have you got? So the reason I left the military, because I don't think we're changing fast enough. We in Ukraine, we have seen a machine gun moment for the army, a jet engine moment for the RAF, and a submarine moment for the Navy. We now have drones, in excess of 1,000 flights a day on the Ukrainian front line, responsible for the largest amount of casualties. The first time ever they've taken over offensive support artillery and mortars for causing casualties. We've had a navy without a navy defeat a navy, and we've got long-range strike going on with mass drone warfare. We've got sophisticated hypersonic missiles flying with dumb shaheeds to overwhelm missile defences. There is an industrial and technological revolution taking place, and we're watching it. We've watched it for the last 3 years. And I think we need to move faster. And I go back to 85%. I've been trained to dive, attack ports, ships, raid, long-range insurgent, patrols, parachute, you name it. 85% of what I could do. And if it doesn't involve a requirement to sort of win the hearts and minds of the population, could be done with drones. In the hardest electronic warfare environment in the world. It's so important. It's such an important lesson. We've got to change faster. And that's why I'm in this job now. That's why I left.
Well, you're in the perfect place, and we definitely need you. And as you think about how do we re-equip our military, perhaps in some ways the world of drones and things will make it easier for us to give ourselves a certain amount without forgetting the boots on the ground that we're always going to need. Will that help us be able to do things quicker with that technology, do you think, rather than having to build a main battle tank or an aircraft carrier, which we'll never do in 10 years?
Yeah. So I actually think it's a mix. It's a mix of 5th and 6th generation capability combined with mass dumb hardware that can be made very sophisticated with capable software. You then overlay AI and quantum on top of that, and then you're in a different world. And so I just think we've got to move faster and further. The Secretary of State also agrees, as does all the other ministers, and that's what the Strategic Defence Review is about.
No, it's going to be a fascinating time. Okay, we're in about the last 10 minutes, and I'm just really interested, Al, in what you'd like to share about your current role, what the job involves, the transition into becoming the MP for Birmingham Selly Oaks. Anything you'd like to share? I just find it fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, the transition has been interesting. I left the military in 3 days. Phoned up the chief of defence staff and said, "Hey, sorry, I'm thinking of going to politics. I'm going to leave." He was really supportive. I was like, "Go for it." Fantastic. So I left in 3 days, and then 3 days after that, I turned up in Birmingham Selly Oak with sort of 2 bags, and I was met by a wonderful woman who ran my campaign for me. And she said, "Hey, we're going to run a campaign." I was like, "Great, I've done loads of those." It's a very different campaign, but I really enjoyed it. And I, as I talked earlier, it really opened and broadened my horizons to learn and sort of understand the MP portfolio, which is fantastic. You get to help people. It's a flat and fast chain. The team are there. We've got a great record of getting after casework and supporting the local constituencies. And I'm really enjoying that part of being a member of Parliament. I would say though, between going on the campaign and becoming an MP, this is the point about maybe being veterans don't realise when they leave the support they have. I turned around and tried to rent a property. And as I phoned people up, "Hey, I need to rent somewhere. We need 3 months' wages, and what? 3 months' wages? I don't have any because I'm unemployed." "Well, you can't rent somewhere then." And so
really?
I find myself really struggling to get accommodation.
Wow.
And so it's just some of those things you don't think about when you come outside. And I think I go back to the point, perhaps, about veterans. When you leave. You've got to get a GP, you've got to get a mortgage, you've got to get... Some people that's normal, but some people who've been living in the military and moving around so often, it's very difficult. And so having this experience, yes, short term from a veteran perspective, but in particular 24 years in the military gives me a really unique perspective to help people and make sure the department is doing what it needs to do to both help veterans, those serving, and indeed those individuals that are wanting to join up. So it's a really privileged position.
Yeah, and very much needed. So, thank you for your service of those 24 years, but also, again, you're giving your service. You're giving to your country, to your constituency, and to this constituency of people like me who are veterans, who, really need this connection. What if you're sort of thinking about the future and what your aspirations are, what you want to do for veterans, families, and people?
Yeah, so there's
just what it is.
Anywhere between 1.9, 2 million veterans in the UK.
Wow.
My view, and I've spoken to various people about this, is the government has never taken responsibility for its veterans. That's the reality. You boil it down. We've never taken responsibility. We've exercised that support network through the charitable sector, which indeed is full of amazing people, volunteers taking their own time, and indeed paid charities to deliver the support for veterans and indeed the armed forces communities. 1,700 plus charities in the UK and £1 billion industry. It's worth just thinking about those statistics. When you add the amount of veterans, nobody should really go without. And so I think there's a more active role the government should play. The Office for Veterans Affairs is the first step of that. But below that, we've got to create the necessary structures in place to deliver better services. And that's what I'm endeavouring to do. Interestingly, it would be remiss of me not to throw this in. All those volunteers out there, and interestingly, the councils are held up by volunteers as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's been absolutely amazing seeing the amount of people who put time in above and beyond their job and their families to help others. And so just a couple of months ago, back in January, and hopefully by the time this comes out, this should be public, I sat down with 3 other veterans and we decided to raise some money for veterans charities. And I went in for a beer and they said, hey, we're going to do a challenge. I was like, okay, what we're going to do? We're going to climb Everest. I was like, well, I can't take 6 weeks out of work to climb Everest because you've got to spend time at base camp. And they're like, oh, no. We're going to do it in 7 days.
What?
Yeah. So I was like, okay. I was like, count me in. And so we've got in May, we're going to try and do a speed ascent of Everest. We're acclimatizing now. So I slept at 3,500 meters last night in my tent. It depletes the oxygen out of the tent. We're in a training program and we're going to try and summit Everest. We're going to go London, Kathmandu, base camp to the top, base camp, Kathmandu, London in 7 days.
Wow.
And to raise money for veterans charities and in particular bereaved children. So,
well, look, I would love to support your charity. So send us the details. I'll sponsor you. And it's, wow, what an achievement. I'm just going to go and see my friend, General Himalaya Tapper. You ought to meet him when you're out there. He was responsible for clearing up after the earthquake. We were at Sandhurst together. Wow. Lovely man, very, very special and good friend. And so he's taking me to Annapurna base camp on it, just a trek with my wife. Nothing like your thing. We're just, but it's just, we're going out there to help because we help obviously in this country. We work with the serious organized crime part of the Home Office, the Department for Work and Pensions, helping children and particularly people been through abuse and getting them into some experiences, coaching, some mentoring with people to give them another chance in life. But out in Nepal, we're going to set up a sort of a branch of this to help some of the girls who've been trafficked into India to be used in the sex trade and helping them with my friend out there. So yeah, what you do is going to be very important.
Well, it'll raise profile of veterans and hopefully raise some funds to support those charitable causes. So hey, giving up a little bit of my extra time, fizz in the morning.
Wow.
7 days.
Really respect that. You have to go to talk to Harry Buddha McGar. Have you met Harry? I'm sure you have.
I've met Harry a couple of times. He's an absolute legend.
Oh yeah, and he was on the podcast as well. Lovely guy. Well, look, we're going to come in a moment to your top tip, ending with that. But before we do, anything else you want to sort of share about? There's a lot going on in the world at the moment. Any final thoughts that you want to share? There's so much, but what would you like to share?
What I would say is we live in a really difficult geopolitical context at the moment. There is, I think, for the first time for most of us, including the ex-military, I'm still a reservist, but ex-military, that it's never been so fractious and dangerous. That war in Ukraine is on a scale of which is incomprehensible to today's society, and as a result, there's an absolute endeavour upon us in the military and indeed as ministers and veterans to reconnect society to defence, to recognise the importance of it. That without it, we have no freedom. We don't have any democratic values. We don't have the right to self-determination. I think that's an absolute necessity to do that as we move forward. And the veterans have a role in that. Society has a role. Defence has a role. But I think it's really, really important to get that point across because we do live in exceptionally dangerous times. And the second one, I would say, when we talk about allies and partners at the moment, there's often turbulence on the surface of the water, but below there's a steady diplomatic channel where sense almost always prevails. And so, there's a good saying, stay calm and carry on.
Yeah.
It's a really useful one for, any time we see the waves getting choppy on the surface.
Yeah, I was listening to I think it was the Finnish Prime Minister just sort of being more stable and saying, "Look, we've fought Russia before. We have a border of so many thousands of miles, and let me tell you, we're supporting you, Ukraine. We're with you, and what's needed." Look, thank you for that. Let's end with a piece that stands in its own right, where if you'd kindly say your name and introduce yourself, and give us a little bit of background on what you've done before and what you're doing now, and your top leadership practical tip. And that would be a great way to finish.
Great, thanks, Jonathan. I'm Alistair Scott Carns. I'm the Minister for Veterans and People, but formerly 24 years in the Marines. And my top tip for any leader listening today would be to very carefully identify and select your team, to trust them, empower, and delegate responsibility, and then release them with very clear boundaries to achieve those outputs and get back to you, and then go again and keep going until it becomes unstoppable.
Thank you very much, Steve. Minister, it's been fabulous having you on the podcast, a real honour. Thank you for your service for 24 years to the country and your continued service, both as Member of Parliament, but also as a minister at a time when we need courageous leadership and we need calm minds. Keep calm and carry on. Good luck with your role.
Thanks, Jonathan. Really appreciate it.